What you call love might be nothing more than an illusion carefully repeated by culture, religion, and the stories we grew up hearing. We say we love because we feel, because we surrender ourselves, because we find in someone what we believe is missing in us. But what if Nietzsche was right when he claimed that love is not a pure feeling, but a silent contract between two wills? What if behind the promises of passion and tenderness lies a hidden negotiation of power, dependency, and interest? Nietzsche didn't write to calm hearts, but to tear away veils. Romantic love so exalted would be nothing more than a disguise for the struggle between two forces seeking to expand, possess, and transform each other. To love, in this sense, is to establish a pact, even if unconscious. I offer you something, you give me something back. There is no purity. There is agreement. There is no absolute surrender. There is a game of forces. Are you ready to face this uncomfortable truth? If this kind of reflection resonates with you, subscribe to the channel and follow this journey to the dark heart of human love. From early on, we are taught to believe in love as the purest of human experiences. Children's stories speak of princes and princesses who meet, overcome obstacles, and live happily ever after. Literature, cinema, and even songs repeat this plot. To love is to surrender. To love is to complete oneself. To love is the promise that life will have meaning. We grow up steeped in this narrative, almost as if it were a natural law, something so obvious that no one dares question it. But Nietzsche, in his ferocity, does not hesitate to tear away this curtain and say, romantic love is an invention, an illusion created to keep us imprisoned. The problem for Nietzsche is not loving, but believing that love is synonymous with purity and disinterest. He reminds us that every human relationship is crossed by forces, by interests, by wills that confront or complement each other. What we call true love often is nothing more than disguised necessity, need painted with the colors of poetry. The young man who says he loves his partner may, in reality, be just looking for someone to protect him from loneliness. The woman who surrenders to her partner may be seeking security, status, recognition. There is nothing wrong with this in itself, but the error lies in believing that these movements are guided by a pure feeling, when in truth they are impulses of survival and expansion. Nietzsche saw love as a vital force, yes, but never as something innocent. To love is, inevitably, to want something in return. Even when we say, "I only want your happiness," this phrase carries within it a hidden desire to be recognized as the one who provides happiness. Even the noblest gestures hide the mark of the will to power, the impulse to affirm oneself through the other. When we believe in the romantic narrative, we become prisoners of it. The couple that lives demanding demonstrations of affection, the partner who requires proof of love, the person who suffers because they are not loved enough, all are trapped in an expectation molded by this illusion. They live as if love were an external, magical entity that should always bring peace, completeness, and harmony. But when reality imposes itself, with fights, frustrations, jealousy, and failures, resentment arises. Love, then, transforms into a source of pain because we believe it should be something it never was. Nietzsche invites us to dismantle this image. He asks us for courage to look at love without veils, without romantic illusions. Love is not a miracle. It is an exchange, an invisible contract. When two people approach each other, each carries expectations, desires, and interests. One seeks security, the other seeks recognition. One wants companionship, the other wants intensity. Each encounter is, at bottom, a silent pact. I offer you something, and you give me in return what I expect. It is this dynamic that maintains relationships, not some supposed sentimental purity. Think of how many couples you know who remain together, not because they love each other in the idealized sense, but because they mutually sustain each other in their needs. Perhaps a marriage lasts decades because one offers financial stability and the other offers emotional care. Perhaps a relationship survives because one gives the other social status, companionship, or validation. These contracts are not confessed, but they exist, and they are what give structure to what we call love. By unmasking the romantic illusion, Nietzsche is not denying the beauty of love. He is, in fact, freeing us from the lie that suffocates it. Love doesn't need to be a fairy tale to be real. To love is human, is flawed, is crossed by interests, and precisely because of this, it is authentic. When we stop expecting love to be a magical force that saves us, we can begin to live it as it is, an encounter of forces that attract, confront, and transform each other. Nietzsche forces us to face an uncomfortable question. Is what we feel really love, or is it just the reflection of our disguised needs? The answer, far from being easy, is the gateway to understanding love not as a romantic dream, but as a naked reality, sometimes harsh but deeply revealing. Nietzsche said that all love is, at bottom, a contract. Not in the legal sense, written on paper, signed before witnesses, but as an existential agreement, silent, often unconscious, that regulates the exchanges between two people. When we look closely at any relationship, we perceive that it is sustained not by ethereal feelings, but by reciprocal expectations. Each one enters the story carrying desires, needs, and conditions that function as unspoken clauses. This invisible contract begins with the first glance, the first gesture of approach. There is something we attract and something we seek. Perhaps one seeks intensity while the other offers stability. Perhaps one needs constant validation while the other finds pleasure in caring and feeling needed. This game creates a pact, even though neither confesses it in words. To love thus is to establish a tacit contract. I will give you this as long as you return that to me. Nietzsche invites us to observe these dynamics with courage because they are what really moves relationships. Romantic discourse prefers to speak of destiny, of soulmates, of unconditional surrender. But behind the poetry, real life is structured on exchanges of power and benefits. The woman who remains with a difficult man perhaps accepts this because he gives her material security. The man who tolerates his partner's coldness perhaps does so because he needs the companionship and status of being married. And both convince themselves it is pure love, when in truth they live sustained by invisible clauses they dare not acknowledge. The danger of denying this contract is resentment. When we believe the other should love without asking anything in return, we become frustrated when we perceive that they also demand, also charge, also desire. It is in this clash between romantic illusion and contractual reality that accusations arise. You don't really love me. You're only with me out of interest. But Nietzsche would say, this is not moral failure. It is just the revelation of love's nature. There is always interest, always expectation. The difference lies in recognizing this without fear, instead of getting lost in grievances. The love contract, contrary to what many think, is not a sign of falseness. It is the very structure that enables the bond. Without these exchanges, love would not sustain itself. Imagine a relationship where one only gives and the other only receives. It quickly breaks because every pact requires reciprocity. The one who gives too much becomes exhausted. The one who only receives becomes hostage to gratitude or guilt. Only the balance of forces keeps the contract alive. Nietzsche saw in this not a human defect, but an expression of the will to power. Each of us seeks to expand our life, affirm our existence, conquer space. Love is just another arena where this will manifest. To love is to find someone who in some way favors our expansion, even if this involves sacrifices. It is at this point that love becomes contract. I yield in certain areas to gain in others. I accept your flaws because you give me something I consider vital. I endure your absences because you offer me a presence that, despite being imperfect, is still necessary. This contract is invisible because it is rarely put into words. No one begins a relationship saying, "I expect you to give me security, and in exchange I will give you recognition." But, in practice, this is exactly what happens. And when one of the clauses stops being fulfilled, the contract enters crisis. Betrayal, for example, hurts not just because of the breach of trust, but because it breaks with an implicit expectation of exclusivity. Indifference hurts not just because the other seems distant, but because they stop providing the attention that sustained the pact. Nietzsche, by revealing this structure, doesn't want to make us cynical, but lucid. Recognizing love as a contract doesn't mean reducing everything to cold calculation, but accepting that every human emotion has a basis of necessity and power. When we see love this way, we stop demanding from it an impossible purity and begin to see it as what it is, an agreement of wills that can be beautiful precisely because it is not perfect. At bottom, love as an invisible contract teaches us to abandon naivety. Instead of deceiving ourselves with promises of completeness, we can face the other as someone with whom we share forces, fragilities, and desires. We can love without expecting miracles, but recognizing that even the deepest of bonds is sustained by an exchange. This consciousness doesn't kill love. On the contrary, it makes it stronger, because it is born from truth and not from illusion. Nietzsche forces us to ask, if all love is a contract, what are the silent clauses that govern yours? What do you offer and what do you demand in return? Knowing how to answer this can be painful, but it is also the first step to loving without masks. When Nietzsche speaks of love, he doesn't describe it as naive surrender, but as a battlefield. To love is to desire, and to desire is always to want to possess. Behind the glow of passion, there is the impulse to transform the other into part of oneself, into an extension of one's will. It is not enough just to be beside someone. We want that person to belong to us, recognize us, confirm us. Love, in this sense, is never totally generous. It carries at its core the instinct of domination. Society usually disguises this impulse with the word jealousy. We say that feeling jealous is a sign of love, proof that we care. But Nietzsche would see jealousy not as proof of love, but as expression of possession. We want to guarantee that the other doesn't deviate from the pact, doesn't escape from the invisible contract that sustains the relationship. Jealousy reveals what we don't confess. To love is, to a large extent, to want exclusivity, to want to imprison the object of our desire within our conditions. Look at any common relationship and you will see this dynamic. The man who demands that his partner dress more discreetly is not taking care of her, but trying to limit her possibilities of choice to maintain his dominion. The woman who complains about her partner's friendships doesn't just seek attention, but wants to restrict his world, to guarantee he remains within her reach. Love, in this scenario, is confused with possession. To love is to say, I want you for myself, and I don't admit that you are free enough to escape my control. Nietzsche doesn't condemn this reality, he just reveals it. Pretending that loving is only freedom and donation would be, for him, hypocrisy. The will to power manifests itself also in love. We want the other because somehow their presence expands our life. But at the same time, we fear that this expansion will be threatened if they have too much autonomy. That's why love oscillates between tenderness and domination, between affection and the desire to control. Desire in this sense is not innocent. To desire is always to want to take something for oneself, transform the other into nourishment for one's own existence. Even the most romantic gestures, writing a letter, declaring oneself, making promises of eternity, carry within them the mark of this will to possess. To say, "I can't live without you," is to admit that the other has become a vital necessity, almost as if they were an organ of our own body. And what happens when this possession is threatened? Love shows its dark side. Resentment, rage, violence emerge. How many stories of destroyed relationships begin with the simple perception that the other cannot be totally controlled? It is at this point that we see clearly the dominating face of love. The discourse of surrender dissolves, and only the struggle to keep the other trapped within our limits remains. Nietzsche makes us see love as a cruel but inevitable game. To love is always to risk dominating and being dominated. There is no neutrality. When we say we love someone, we are also affirming, "I want you to be part of my expansion, even if this means reducing your freedom in certain aspects." And inversely, we also accept being dominated because the love contract demands concessions. However, the problem is not domination itself, but the lie that covers it. Romantic love sells the idea that to love is to liberate the other, but in practice, we demand their submission to our expectations. Nietzsche invites us to look at this contradiction without masks. If there is possession in love, let it be recognized. If there is desire for domination, let it be acknowledged. Only thus can we escape the hypocrisy that transforms passion into resentment. See the everyday, the couple that calls itself free but establishes hidden rules of coexistence, the lover who swears to demand nothing but corrodes with anger when they don't receive attention, the person who promises absolute respect but can't stand when the other chooses a different path. All this reveals that love is, yes, a struggle of wills. There is no neutrality, there is no purity, there is always power at play. Assuming this vision may seem cruel, but it brings a different form of freedom. When we recognize that to love is also to possess and dominate, we stop expecting the fantasy of unconditional surrender. We begin to live love as it really is. A dangerous dance between desire and power, in which both sides try at the same time to expand and protect themselves. Nietzsche leaves us then with an uncomfortable question. Do you love someone, or do you just desire to possess them? And if it is possession, to what extent would you be willing to admit this without falling into the illusion of romantic purity? The lie of romantic love is perhaps one of the cruelest inventions of human culture. We grow up believing that to love is to be saved, that there exists someone capable of filling all our voids and giving meaning to our existence. This narrative keeps us hopeful, but also condemns us to inevitable frustrations. For Nietzsche, the suffering that so often accompanies love is not born from love itself, but from the lie we project onto it. When we idealize love as purity, disinterest, and eternity, we create an impossible expectation. We expect the other to always be attentive, always present, always willing to put us first. We demand that the relationship be a refuge against all the pains of the world. But no human being is capable of sustaining this role. The weight of idealization transforms the relationship into prison. The partner is no longer seen as an individual, but as a character in a fable we created in our mind. Nietzsche would say that love becomes poison when it relies on this lie, because the greater the illusion, the greater will be the resentment when it dissolves. How many people don't enter marriages believing they have found the solution to all problems, only to, years later, feel deceived, betrayed by reality? The partner who promised happiness reveals themselves to be too human, imperfect, incapable of corresponding to fantasies, and what remains then is the sensation of fraud. It wasn't true love, but the truth is different. It was love, yes, only it never was what we expected it to be. This love lie extracts a high price. It imprisons not only those who believe, but also those who are placed in the position of having to sustain it. Think of someone who lives being charged to demonstrate affection, to prove their love every day, to be the incarnation of an unreachable ideal. This person doesn't love in freedom but in constant debt, as if they were always lacking. Love transforms into a stage of demands, into permanent tribunal. Resentment is the direct child of the lie. The one who expects too much becomes frustrated, and frustration manifests not just as sadness, but as bitterness, accusation, and often hatred. We see couples who began passionate and end treating each other like enemies, because each feels the other didn't fulfill the promises of eternal love. But who actually promised this? It wasn't the other. It was culture. It was the stories we accepted without questioning. Nietzsche alerts us to the danger of seeking in love what it cannot offer. Love is not medicine for existential loneliness, is not antidote against life's suffering, is not guarantee of happiness. It is just an encounter of human forces, flawed, contradictory. When we insist on transforming it into salvation, we also transform our partner into enemy, because no one can carry the burden of being the meaning of another's life. Look at the reality around you. How many marriages aren't sustained just by convenience, fear of loneliness or social pressure, while the flame of passion has long been extinguished? How many relationships aren't maintained by appearance, where each pretends to be happy to correspond to the romantic ideal they once believed? This theater costs dearly. It kills spontaneity, corrodes authenticity, and, at bottom, prevents people from living love as it really is. Imperfect, ambiguous, full of tensions. Nietzsche doesn't ask us to abandon love, but to abandon the lie, recognizing that love is not purity, but contract, is painful at first because it destroys our most cherished illusions. But this pain is liberating. It allows us to love without demanding perfection, without placing the other on a pedestal impossible to sustain. When we stop believing that love needs to be eternal and absolute, we begin to value it in what it can really offer: intensity, transformation, encounter between two living forces. The price of the love lie is the loss of freedom. The gain of truth is the possibility of loving with lucidity. Love will not be less intense because of this, but perhaps it will be more honest, less suffocating, less loaded with resentment. Nietzsche provokes us to exchange the fable of the soulmate for the courage to accept human imperfection. And here arises the question that disturbs: how much of your love suffering really comes from the other, and how much comes from the lie you yourself projected onto them? Nietzsche saw love not as exception, but as expression of life itself. Everything that lives seeks to expand, conquer, affirm its presence in the world. This is what he called will to power. This force is in all beings, in the animal that hunts, in the plant that grows toward the sun, in the artist who creates, in the thinker who breaks traditions. Love, in this sense, is just another form of this same vital energy, an attempt to affirm oneself through the other, to grow alongside them, to increase one's own potency. When we fall in love, we don't just seek companionship. We seek intensity. We seek expansion. The other becomes stage of our affirmation, source of stimulus, mirror that confirms our existence. To love, then, is not to lose oneself, but to multiply oneself. It is as if life found an expansion route in the encounter of two forces. Passion gives us energy, moves us, launches us into experiences that alone we might not dare to live. But this expansion is never neutral. The will to power is not just growth, it is also confrontation. To love is to encounter another force that also wants to affirm itself. Therefore, love is a field of tensions. Each seeks to expand without setting aside their own needs. From this arise conflicts, silent disputes, constant negotiations. When we say a couple completes each other, what we really see is the temporary balance between two wills that learn to coexist without nullifying each other. Nietzsche helps us perceive that love is not failure of reason, but continuation of life in its crudest form. We don't love to be good, we love because we are impelled to affirm ourselves, to surpass our limits. Love, in this sense, is not moral virtue, but vital impulse. Even when it hurts, even when it places us in situations of suffering, it is still life pulsing in us, asking for expansion. See a couple at the beginning of a relationship. They look at each other, exchange endless messages, make plans, live an almost unbearable intensity. The world seems smaller before the force of that encounter. It's not just feeling, it's potency. Each finds in the other a possibility of amplifying their existence. Perhaps she feels safer, perhaps he feels more creative, perhaps both feel that together they have more courage to face life. It is the will to power realizing itself under the mask of love. But this same force can turn against us. When the invisible contract becomes unbalanced, when possession becomes suffocating, when the desire for domination exceeds the limit of coexistence, love stops being expansion and becomes prison. The energy that once moved us transforms into burden. Still, even in pain, it is the same will to power that manifests. We continue wanting, demanding, fighting. Suffering in love is not a sign of absence of life, but of its intensity. Nietzsche might say that to love is inevitably dangerous, because all expansion carries the risk of destruction. The same passion that lifts us can ruin us. To love is to expose oneself to the possibility of losing oneself, of being consumed by the other. But this is also the beauty of love. It forces us to live more intensely, to exit apathy, to confront our own limits. Love, then, should not be seen as weakness, but as radical manifestation of life. To love is to assume the risk of transformation. And transformation for Nietzsche is always the sign that we are alive. If we seek absolute security, we will never know what love can offer. But if we accept that to love is to enter into play with another will, we can discover in love not just pleasure, but also strength, growth, overcoming. The romantic lie tries to convince us that love should be tranquil, stable, eternal. But Nietzschean truth shows us that love is tempestuous, unstable, changeable, and it is precisely because of this that it is vital. Love is not calm waters, it is rough sea. Whoever enters it needs to learn to navigate, knowing they will never have total control over the waves. At bottom, to love is to participate in life's movement in its most intense form. It is to be carried by the current of will to power, knowing it can both enlarge and ruin us. But it is better to risk oneself in this sea than to live on the margin, never feeling the force of the current. And here, Nietzsche leaves us before another disturbing question. Have you been loving like someone who seeks comfort or like someone who seeks expansion? Because to love, in its essence, is not to protect oneself, but to risk living more. If love is not purity, if it is not unconditional surrender, if it is not salvation, what remains of it? For many, this revelation may sound like condemnation. If love is just contract, possession, and struggle of wills, then there would be no space for beauty or tenderness. But Nietzsche didn't see it this way. He didn't want to kill love. He wanted to free it from the lies that make it unbearable. The challenge for him is not to abandon love, but to learn it anew, to love with lucidity. To love with lucidity is to accept that every human bond carries interests, expectations, and power games. There is no shame in this. It is life's very nature. When we recognize this structure, we stop demanding from love what it can never give us. We don't expect perfection, we don't ask for eternity, we don't charge purity. We begin to live love as it really is, imperfect, flawed, crossed by tensions, but also intense, transformative, and vital. This requires courage, because it means giving up the most comfortable illusions. The fantasy of the soulmate protects us from loneliness. The promise of forever gives us a sense of security. The myth of purity makes us believe someone can save us from ourselves. When Nietzsche tears away these veils, he leaves us exposed before truth. To love is risky, uncertain, and always fleeting. But only on this unstable ground is it possible to truly love, because love stops being theater and becomes real encounter between two living forces. Think of a relationship where both partners assume this lucidity. They know they are not perfect, that they cannot complete each other entirely, that in some moments they will fail. But they also know they can grow together, that they can transform themselves, that they can share an intensity that is worthwhile, even without guarantees. This love doesn't promise eternity, but delivers presence. It doesn't promise purity, but offers authenticity. It is less dream and more reality, and precisely because of this, it is stronger. Nietzsche believed that to live is to affirm life, even in its harshness. To love with lucidity is a way of affirming life without lies. It is to accept that love can be contract, but that this contract doesn't need to be prison. It can be creative pact, space of transformation. If I recognize my own interests and the other's interests, we can negotiate consciously, without resentment. We can love without demanding that the other be more than they are. This lucidity also frees us from the weight of disappointment. If I don't expect perfection, I'm not surprised by flaws. If I don't expect eternity, I value each instant. If I don't expect purity, I learn to deal with the inevitable shadows of human bonding. To love with lucidity is not to love less. It is to love without illusions. It is to look the other in the eyes and say, I know you are not my savior, and even so I choose to live this encounter. Nietzsche invites us to exchange naivety for courage. To love without masks is one of existence's greatest challenges because it requires facing both our own needs and the other's limitations. But by doing this, we open space for a truer love, less idealized, more human. This love may not promise eternal happiness, but it promises something rarer, real intensity, authentic transformation, life lived at its maximum potency. To love with lucidity is, therefore, to love without guarantees. It is to risk oneself knowing it can hurt. It is to choose life even when it doesn't correspond to our fantasies. It is to understand that love, like everything in existence, is struggle and creation at the same time. We don't need to destroy it, just learn to inhabit it without lies. In the end, Nietzsche returns love to us in its most dangerous and most beautiful form. Not the love that comforts, but that awakens. Not the love that saves, but that transforms. To love with lucidity is to live on the razor's edge. It can cut, but it can also open paths. And perhaps this is exactly what life asks of us. Not security, but intensity. And here remains the question Nietzsche would leave echoing. Have you been loving with courage to see the truth, or do you still hide in the comfortable lie of romantic love? We reach the end of this journey, crossing through love's shadows, according to Nietzsche. We saw how romantic illusion imprisons us, how invisible contract sustains relationships, how desire hides possession and domination, how love's lie generates resentment, how love is expression of will to power, and finally, how to love with lucidity is perhaps humanity's greatest challenge. Love, stripped of masks, is not the fairy tale we were taught, but neither is it an inevitable tragedy. It is rather a field of forces, a pact between wills, a vital experience that can both imprison and liberate us. Nietzsche didn't want us to abandon love. On the contrary, he wanted us to live it with courage, without illusions, without the comfortable lie that transforms us into victims. To love for him is to accept the risk of pain, because only those who risk also know life's intensity. It is to understand that there is no purity, but there is potency. There is no eternity, but there is presence. There is no salvation, but there is transformation. And now, after everything we've traversed, the question remains, what was the greatest lie about love that imprisoned you until today? Are you willing to face naked truth and live love as it really is? Contract, pact, game of forces, but also as opportunity for expansion and intensity. If these reflections resonated with you, write in the comments where you're watching us from. Share your vision, tell your experience, and don't forget, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and be part of this community that seeks to think about life with depth. Thank you for being here, for dedicating your time to dive into philosophy and the human heart. We continue together toward lucidity and the courage to live.